Alright guys, we're back on the engine here. Got all the parts back from the machine shop, so we're gonna get ready here to assemble, start assembling everything, and hopefully have this thing up and running in short time here. But so I got the block pretty much prepped. I got the main studs put in, the new ARP studs put in there. I got bearings set in here now. I have my block off plates that I put in for the oil squirters, so we're getting rid of the oil squirters, we're blocking them off. I got this cleaned up best I could, and next step is basically set the crank in here, start getting that tightened down. I did have to go through and kind of deburr the crank itself. Anytime you're building an engine, sharp edges are a bad thing. Basically, anytime you're building an engine like this, sharp edges aren't always a great thing. A lot of times that's where a crack will start if you're really pushing the engine. So a lot of times you have to go through and deburr an engine, you know, especially cast blocks or cast cranks, this and that. They can have some sharp edges, or after machining and stuff. Now you will have some that are just a sharp machined edge, but anytime you can kind of smooth that out just a little bit helps. So kind of what we're going to do now is we're going to get the crank set in here, get our main caps installed, all tightened up. I already kind of went through and checked my bearing clearances. I just use a dial bore gauge. Basically, you take the measurement of the crank journal where the main bearing is, and you measure that, and then you can set your dial bore gauge to 0 on that. So then once you put your caps on and your bearings in, you take your dial bore gauge and you check how much difference there is. So if it's at 2.500 and you put your dial bore gauge in there and it's telling you 2.501, you have 1/1000ths clearance basically. So I went through and all those are looking good right now. So I basically just have to get the crank cleaned up, get it lubed up. We'll get it set in here and we can get our caps put on. We'll make sure it spins and everything is good to go there. And then we can actually start assembling pistons and getting them in and hopefully get the rotating assembly installed pretty soon here. So let's get to it. All right, crankshaft is all installed now. It's spinning pretty freely and can pretty easily do it with one hand. The spec on it is like no more than 53 inch-pounds rotating. I got about 10 on it right now, so that's good. Doing great there. I got it kind of lubed up here for the connecting rods to go on to. I got my end play checked. Got a few thousandths end play on the crank, so that's good. And nothing's making contact or hitting anywhere, so that's a plus too. So we should be able to start putting rods and pistons in now. I got to get everything connected. I got my little bucket over there that's got everything in it. So I got to start putting the rods onto the pistons and putting bearings into the rods themselves, and then we can kind of start putting them in here. So I'm going to rotate the block here around so I can kind of pound the piston straight down, but I just wanted to show you this while it's still up. But anytime you're putting whatever piston you're putting in, try to make the rod journal as far away from the connecting rod as you can. It'll allow the piston to fall into the cylinder when you do it, and it gives you a little extra room to kind of guide it into place, because you don't want the rod to make contact with this until it's centered. So depending on what style of rod you have, this is an old one here, but sometimes these have bolts in there, this rod here. Sometimes it'll have a stud sticking out. So when you take the cap off, the stud is still there. When you do that, a lot of times that can make contact with, tip over. A lot of times the rod or the stud will stick through and make contact with the crank and gouge it or damage it. They do make, I think I still have some in here. Yeah. Man, these have been in a while, but these are little sleeves that you put over the bolts to protect them. So when you slide it in there, it doesn't do damage to the crank, and you can pretty much protect it however you want. But these, when I put them in there, there won't be any bolts sticking out or studs sticking out, but you still have the sharp edges where the half of the cap and connecting rod meet. So that could gouge or damage the crank journal. So try to have it, like if I'm installing this cylinder here, I want this as far back as possible just to give you a little time to guide it in correctly, and it'll let everything sit in there all the way. And then you're just going to have to rotate it as you kind of go through the cylinders here. All right, to kind of show you how I'm assembling each one of these pistons. I got it zoomed out because I'm going to be moving around here a little bit, but basically starting off by putting my connecting rod bearings in the two halves. One thing you want is you got to make sure that anytime you separate the two halves of the cap, whether it's a main bearing or a rod bearing, that you're keeping track of which direction they were. Typically the tangs, there's little tangs on here that the bearing can only go in one way. They're usually lined up together. And on this one, all the tangs were kind of lined up on one side. So now I know that on my connecting rod, it says manly on one side, and on the other side it's blank. So I know that the manly part has to go the opposite of whatever direction the arrow is on the piston pointing forward. So all of the manlies should be pointing towards the rear of the engine, and all the tangs will be on this side of the engine. If it's flipped upright, it would be passenger side, but not to say that your engine would be that way, but it's anytime you separate the piston and connecting rod, you want to do the same. You want to make sure the direction is the way it's supposed to be. Sometimes these connecting rods will be offset. The small end could be offset one way or the other. The big end could be offset. Sometimes the chamfer on the big end here is different on one side versus the other. Usually the bigger side of the chamfer goes towards the fillet of the crank. The fillet basically being a radius or it's rounded, would go kind of on the outsides here on one journal, just because it gives it more strength. Now some of them you don't necessarily see it or might not have it, but it's just something you got to pay attention to anytime you got this stuff apart, just to make sure these connecting rods are centered, so it doesn't matter which way you flip them. But I'm staying with the way the factory had all the bearing tangs facing one side, so that's the way I'm installing all of them. So just a matter of figuring that out. But basically getting that assembled, everything is clean right now. Sometimes these bearings will say upper or lower, something to pay attention to. A lot of times if you look on the back side, they have writing on there. Some will say, like this one says standard, that means standard size. You have oversized bearings, so it'll say if it's oversized or not usually. So all those things need to be paid attention to when you're assembling an engine or tearing one apart. So making notes is, if you don't do this on a regular basis, make a lot of notes, pay a lot of attention, take a lot of pictures if you have to. But we should have it pretty close to assembled the right way here. We're going to get a little oil on here. Manly wants the connecting rod bolts soaking or submerged in 30 weight oil. So that's what I got over here in the pan. I got the two bolts sitting in here until we get to that point. But right now I'm just kind of lubing up the pin boss for the piston. And then the small end of the connecting rod here. Get that lubed up. And let's see, should be opposite. Set that there, we'll get the pin itself lubed up. This, typically, when you're assembling an engine, if you plan on kind of as soon as you get it together, starting and running it, you can go with some engine oil like this, and otherwise you have engine lube, which I do have on the bearings. You'll see me put them on. It's the red stuff there. That sticks better and it kind of stays put a lot better than oil does, or oil will kind of run off if it's going to be sitting a little while. And could go dry, where the engine lube is kind of made to stay on there a little bit better. So making sure everything moves freely. Connecting rod is floating nice. And then I have to install the little wire snap ring, I guess, here. Got them down in here. These can be a pain in the butt. Something to take your eye out too if you're not careful. Just kind of get it pressed in there. Get a little coaxing from a screwdriver. And okay, got that one snapped in, and then basically checking to make sure that it's fully seated into that snap ring groove on both sides. And everything seems to be good there. Last thing you want to do is forget to put that snap ring in and then put it in the cylinder and you don't notice it, and that works its way out and just wrecks your engine. So I'm just kind of double checking this, so that will be facing this way, piston going that way, rod tang will be on this side. Yep, okay. I'm going to get some assembly lube here, put on the bearing, both halves. And then we kind of smear it around a little bit. So far, I got two pistons already installed, number 1 and 5, and everything is moving freely yet, moving smoothly. I haven't sometimes when you switch to an H-beam rod, connecting rod versus an I-beam, which was in the factory, H-beam rods can be a little bit bulkier sometimes, so you got to watch the clearance. But these so far all clear in the block. I don't see them coming close to where my oil squirter plates are, block off plates in there. So, but all right, we got those bearings lubed up. So now I want to get some oil put on the piston and rings itself. So come over to my little oil bath and just kind of smear some all over the piston and rings. Make sure that goes in nice and smoothly. Going with this pre-sized piston installer, piston ring compressor, I should say. Man, that works great so far. I've used those other ones in the past that are kind of a universal that you just tighten to whatever size you want. There's always one little spot on there, it seems like, that the ring wants to pop out, or it's not as good as these are. So if you have the chance and you know what size piston you have, go with it. There, whoops, let's get that cylinder or that block turned over. All right, just turn this up. So all I have to do is push straight down. And what I'm going to do is kind of line up my piston so it's facing forward, the arrow on there. I'm going to slide it into my ring compressor. Carefully, I guess. And then what I'm going to do is just kind of slide it out the bottom a little bit before you get to the rings. And that's going to help get that centered in the cylinder and kind of line up my connecting rod so it's square to the crank. The skirt of the piston will basically center that in there, and then I can see my valve reliefs. They're pretty much straight, so as long as I line that up and everything, just push it in, boom, done. Piston's in there. Works so slick. I don't have to sit there and crank on something else and tighten it up and get the push in there. So that works darn smooth. Let's just say that. And what I'm going to do here, get it turned back over. And we're basically going to slide it in the rest of the way here. And get my fingers down in there. Okay. Where is, let's do this. See if this is strong enough. All right, and we just got to push it up the rest of the way. Some grease and oil everywhere, but that's the way it is. You want to make sure there's something there when you start this thing up. So it's up tight against there. Just double checking to make sure I still have my tang on the correct side. Piston was lined up, facing forward. Now I can slap the cap on there. Just got to line up my tangs. And these have little kind of centering sleeves in here. So that makes a nice tight fit in here. And I just got to make sure that it kind of goes on evenly. So a little tricky to kind of get it started, but I'll push them together. And I'll grab my submerged bolts over here. Let them kind of drip off, drain off a little bit. And you can kind of see you can't in the camera, but when you're doing this, you can kind of see the line where their space is, or they're separated. And just got to try and draw that down evenly until it's tight. Factory ones, factory likes to use a lot of the torque to yield bolts, which I don't like. I think I mentioned that earlier. I'd rather have just a regular bolt or a nice ARP bolt where you can reuse it a bunch of times. You don't have to throw it away. You just torque it to one setting and you're done. None of this torque to yield crap where you gotta torque it down and then turn another additional 90 degrees or 60 degrees or whatever. I just don't like them. So these get torqued to 55 on here. So grab the, what did I do with that socket now? There it is. Just kind of look and see that we're tightening it down even. There we go. And before I torque that down, I want to put both my connecting rods in here on the same journal first, just to keep the connecting rod from trying to twist on there, even though there's not much clearance there where it should turn, but just kind of have some support on both sides of it as I torque it so they don't move a lot. And then after I do get both of those pistons and connecting rods installed, I'm turning the crank over just to make sure it freely turns. If all of a sudden it's binding and turning a lot harder than it did the previous one, then you know something's going on there. So you can kind of stop, look it over, maybe your clearances are too tight or something. But yeah, every time you kind of install one of those pistons or pistons combinations, I guess, keep cranking that engine. Even as you're putting heads on and timing chains and all that stuff, just keep turning it just to make sure that nothing is all of a sudden binding. Because you don't want to get to the point where you go to crank the engine and it's already installed and then the thing doesn't turn over freely. So, yeah, once that's kind of torqued down there, or once I get that other one in there, I can torque these two down. And then I'm marking to make sure, I put a little paint pen mark on there just to make sure that visually I can go down the line and see, yep, they're all torqued, and then we can move on. But so far going together smoothly, and I'm not having any clearance issues. So we'll get the rest of these put in, and hopefully we can kind of put the oil pump and the rear main cover on and all that stuff, and eventually get to flipping it up and putting the heads on. So we'll keep going down here and get this thing assembled. All right, got the short block basically assembled now. I'm getting ready to kind of put the heads on it, and basically all the rest of the cams and timing gear and all that stuff. Get that thing assembled here. I just wanted to mention this. When I bought these ARP bolts, or studs I should say, there's this little spacer down here for the oil pickup tube is different, or it needs to be modified if you're reusing the old one. I ended up just buying this one. It's shorter, and basically what happens is because the stud is a little bit higher, the nut's a little different than the bolt, this changes, and you want to make sure that this is not being suffocated by the pan. And you also don't want it too high where if the oil level drops just a little bit, that it starts getting air in the system. So you want it maybe about 1/4 of an inch or 3/8 of an inch off the bottom of the oil pan. And we're doing good there. I measured it, I double checked. Basically you put a straight edge across here, and then you measure from the bottom of the straight edge down to the block here. And then you can take the pan, basically measure, put a straight edge across here, and then down to the pan, see what your measurement is. Then you can kind of tell what the difference is, how your gap is. Another way to do that is maybe to put like some tin foil or something up here, or some putty or something like that, and then put the pan on it and just see how much it squishes down or whatever, see what the actual clearance is. Now you got to remember to take into consideration the thickness of the gasket too. So I did all that. I've got about 1/4 of an inch to 3/8 right now, so that's good. And next step, basically flipping this thing over and getting the heads put on it. One thing I do want to try and figure out too before I put this pan on, which we'll have to put the heads and the timing chains and all that stuff on there before I can, because the front cover's got to go on before I can put the pan on, because that all bolts to it here. So it's just easier to put the pan on last. But one thing I want to try and figure out is if I can put more oil in the pan. Currently this thing takes about 9 quarts because I have the remote filter over here. So there's a little bit in the lines and stuff that run up to it. And I'm probably going to take, I don't know, just some water or something like that, and try and measure in how high this comes up, because currently the where the gasket sits here and basically the skirt of the block the crank only hangs down about 1/2 inch lower than the bottom of the skirt. So if I fill this up with maybe 2 gallons or something like that, which is 8 quarts, then see kind of where that comes up. Maybe I can add another quart or 2 or whatever. Just the more oil you can get in the pan without it actually hitting the crank, or the crank splashing through it, the better. You know, a lot of them, you'll see windage trays on the Mustangs. They have windage trays in here. On the F-150s, they don't have them, I don't think. So, but if you can get it as high as you can without the crank hitting it, that's better. So I'll probably try and figure that out before putting the pan on. But for now, get this thing flipped over and starting getting all these parts put on here. All right, I got the engine all buttoned back up. Getting ready to put that back in the truck. I am actually waiting. I'm going to replace this thermostat and go with a colder thermostat. So I'm kind of waiting on that, but I don't necessarily have to put the coolant in it just yet to fire it up. We can run it for a little bit without coolant. And also I'm going to actually try and make some different coolant lines that look a little bit nicer in the truck. So we'll have to get the engine set back in there for that. Once this thing is off the stand and on the hoist, I got to put the flex plate on and the spacer plate back here. They're sitting right there. I'll get those put back on. And once the engine's in the truck, then I can put the intake on there, and it won't be too much longer, and we'll get this thing fired up. All right, I've got the engine back installed in the truck, mostly hooked up and everything. Motor is in, transmission is hooked up. I don't have the drive shaft or the exhaust necessarily hooked up. I have the headers and stuff on. I'm going to run it probably without the exhaust hooked up just to make sure everything's good to go before buttoning it up. But I'm being kind of held up. Missing 2 of the fittings. I kind of mentioned that I was going to change these lines going to my remote filter. I need to make up 2 lines, -6 lines going down here to the oil filter adapter. And I had bought 2 45s that I needed. But these are not PTFE fittings. These are just a regular AN fitting, so they won't work with the hose I have. I almost have exclusively run this PTFE hose. It's got that plastic liner inside there. I just prefer that stuff. It seems to work pretty good on my projects. So waiting for a couple of those. That'll be a couple days, I guess, before I can get those and get those lines made up. So I can't run it, make oil pressure until I get those fitted. But kind of getting everything else that I want to do set up here. Everything is hooked up. Right now I do have the injectors unplugged because I want to crank this thing to build oil pressure before it actually fires. I did pre-lube it when I put the engine together, but I did mention that there was a couple other things that I wanted to do to this thing, kind of upgrade, and one of them is I've always kind of wanted to clean up this side of the engine a little bit. I used to have these two hoses here for the heater core that kind of ran across here over to the heater core there. And to me, I'd like to have this cover that goes on here, that little orange plate that covers that up. What do you want to call them? A coil cover, I guess. And I wanted to clean that up so you can see that almost as well as you can see this side. Eventually I'll get around to taking this main wiring harness and lengthening it. I would like to run it back here along the firewall more and then over. I should have almost done that right away when I put this engine together, but I wanted to have this thing running, so it didn't happen. And plus there's a fair amount of wiring in there. So eventually I'll get around to doing that. I'll extend that and move all the wires back so you'll just get a better clean look of everything. But what I want to do is actually these two heater hose, heater core lines, I wanted to make like a steel line or a copper line or something that just clean this up so they're not as ugly, I guess. So what I've been working on, or my idea, I have to remake these, but I got two copper lines here kind of made up. We'll see if I can do this one-handed, but this one's going to go like that in there. I had a couple of 90s that I just come off of there. One is going to go right here, and the other one's going to go, let me see if I can get this somewhat started so you get an idea. So that's how they're going to look. I'm going to have these kind of leveled out, running the same, almost parallel, well, they will be parallel with the fuel rail here. So I'm going to have clamps holding them together. I got some clamps coming, and I just want to make these look a lot cleaner. And these will be painted black, they won't be copper. But I have to redo these lines just because I kind of made these somewhat quick. And this one I cut short anyway. I kind of kinked one of them here. Well, they're all kind of kinked a little bit. But I found out that if I go a little bit slower when I bend them, they don't kink. So I'll kind of show you that. But I'm going to make a couple of these up while I'm waiting for my fittings and stuff and my other parts to show up. One other thing I'll probably get to in this video is, where is that here? So this will be my dipstick that I'm putting in the transmission. It's a B&M transmission dipstick. You can see it's plenty long here. It actually comes with this hose here, which is, I believe, like 40 inches or something like that. It's way too long for my application. So I'll show you how I shorten that up here, but this is just some more AN line that I had sitting around. I was able to kind of make a shorter line, but I have to shorten this up. So I'll show you that, but first we'll get those lines made up for the heater core and see how those turn out. So I'm using just a 5/8 copper tubing. Comes in a spool of about 10 feet here. And I'm having a lot of issues with it kinking. Where was the original one? I've been kind of bending up a bunch of them. You know, like this is an original bend. It's okay, it's not gonna leak or anything, it just kind of looks crappy. So I'm trying to get it as smooth as possible. I got a 5/8 bender here, which is working okay, but I thought, oh, okay, I'll make sure I get this lubed up. That didn't make a difference. It does help to put a little, some sort of spray or something on there so it slides nice. I tried a little bit of a heat, maybe softening it up to make it sure it just kind of molds better. I thought maybe it was a certain way of which way I was bending it, but you know, I can get decent bends. Now you're going to get some ripples in there. Like this one turned out pretty good. It's going to have some ripples because that material just doesn't have anywhere to go, because the inside of the radius is all going to be bunched up. The outside is going to be stretched. It's just the way it is. A lot of these will have dimples in here, so it has a place to go, so it's nice and uniform. I don't have that style, but what I'm learning here, because here's one too, I have to make a really sharp bend on the one pipe, and this one turned out, I thought, pretty good. That's a nice uniform ripple. Here's another one, and I don't even think I lubed these up. This one you hardly see anything here, and it's a nice, more than a 90-degree elbow. And so trying to figure out why the heck these are working out so great, and every time I bend one of these other ones it's not. The only thing I can think of so far is because this comes in a coil in a box, it's somewhat tight. You know, it's coiled up kind of the way this is here, so you have to straighten it out. Well, as you straighten it out, you'll get little ripples like that in there. So if you end up bending it in those spots, it already has a small kink started. So I guess I don't have one currently. I may end up buying one. Like I said, these will actually work, but it's just they don't look as pleasing. Now once they're painted, I don't know if I'll be able to see those ripples and stuff. Maybe it'll get worse. But from what I can tell, is like this piece here where it worked out so great, there weren't any kinks or ripples in it to start with. So get this this copper as smooth as possible before you start bending it. So if you have one of those straighteners, tubing straighteners, use that to uncoil the coil versus just kind of kinking it as you go or bending it as you go. I was trying to be as delicate as I could, but you could still kind of see small little dents along the way as I try to straighten this out. This one I kind of left it somewhat coiled as I bent it, and it turned out pretty good. So I'm okay with that. This was the worst one or the one that I was worried about the most, because it bends back more than 90. I'll show you kind of how I have this set up here. And the hard part is on the Coyotes here, they're pretty tight in these areas where they have to come out. This one, it doesn't come straight up. If it came straight up, it hit the fuel rail here, so you kind of have to bend around it. But so get that in there a little bit, and like I said, it kind of is folding it a little bit here. Once I get the clamps on there, that's basically what it's going to look like, but I'll paint them black. And there's clearance around there. I just got to put some hose clamps on there, and I think that'll look fine once that gets painted black. I'm going to put about 6 clamps on here, one here, kind of one here, probably one back there. But I'm pretty happy with that. I may end up just buying some more copper. I've already gone through a bunch of copper the way it is, trying to figure these out. This stuff is just so soft that it bends pretty easily or kinks pretty easily, so you have to be careful with it. But yeah, kind of everything's, I'm going to make that all parallel with the top of the fuel rail that way, and then this way, and then we'll get clamps on there. And like I said, that kind of cleans up this whole area, so it just makes it look a lot nicer, and you don't have all these hoses draped across the top here covering that up. So the only thing left would be to do this, but so far I'm pretty happy with the way that is. Like I said, I may buy a straightener. I see they got them on Amazon, 30, 40 bucks or so. So it's just that I don't have one now, and it'd be nice to have one right now. So I may redo these again, but just a tidbit for you guys. If you end up doing something like this, get a straightener. I think that really helps when you go to bend this stuff, and save you a little bit of money, where I've already been through 2 coils of copper here, and just trying to figure this out. But so far I don't mind with the way they look. And what I'll end up doing is, even though, well, maybe I don't have to make brackets, but once I get the clamps on here, they're pretty sturdy. But I may make a little bracket that comes off of the intake bolt here, comes up and then goes underneath, and then everything can be bolted through the clamps and everything like that. But right now they're actually pretty solid. Once I get the clamps on there, that's going to tighten all that up. So just one less bracket I don't have to make, I guess. One other thing I was going to show you guys too is, because of this copper tubing, there's no flare on there or no bead. I do have a tubing bead roller, but this is way too small to fit on it. It needs to be about 3/4 to fit on my roller. So I'm going with this old trick to use a crimper. You can see it's got a little crimping spot there. This is just a $15 wire crimper that I bought from Harbor Freight. I did have to modify it. You can see I ground it down a little bit because it needs to be able to fit in the pipe. And I already got this one done, but you can see you just go around a little at a time. You just work your way all the way around that pipe, and you'll make a bead. Now, it doesn't have to be all the way around. It just has to be something that the hose won't pop off. So, I mean, you could do a short little bead on this side and a short little bead on this side if you want, but it just looks a little bit better if you go all the way around. And you just got to make sure that you kind of, this one I don't have a stop on it, but if you had some sort of stop, let me see if I can show this. All right. You just find a spot where you can kind of stop it and go in there and you crimp it. You can see it leaves a little bump there. And you just work your way all the way around and you get yourself a bead. So quick little easy $15 trick there. You can do this with a bigger pipe too, I guess. So this will work on anything larger than what I got here. You just have to kind of maybe round. This is pretty squared off in here. So you have to kind of round it because the inside of the tube is round. So, I mean, you could even take a pliers, maybe weld a little ball bearing or something on the end of a pliers and then cut a groove in it on this side where that ball bearing would be. And you just got to crimp it all the way around. So nice round bead. And you're good to go, and then the way the hose doesn't come off. So I will have to do that to these other pipes here yet, but now that they're all formed up and stuff, I think that'll work good. These are actually the little clamps I'm going to have in between there, basically like that. These are the top half of them, basically, and then a bolt will run through the center of them. Once I get the clamps on, I don't think these things are going to move anywhere once they're attached to the hoses and everything else. I'll have one here, and then one back here. So a total of 3, and they'll be spaced evenly, but one's basically running parallel with the fuel rail, and the other one's running parallel with the engine harness here. I kind of wish these clamps were a little bit closer together, but just the way it is. I could probably re-drill that hole or whatever and make them tighter, but I think that'll look fine. So this one should be out about like that. And I think those will look pretty good. I want to be able to crank this thing over and fire it up. I don't have all the coolant lines and everything hooked up yet, but I should be able to run it for a little bit without coolant lines. But I need my new hoses that are coming from my oil filter adapter back here. You can kind of see the 2 fittings back behind the alternator there. I need to get 2 45s that come off and kind of shoot it over right here is where I have my hoses running, then into this little bracket, and then up to the filter right there, to the fittings on the filter. I'm having a hell of a time with those fittings. I need two 45s, and they're -6 fitting, but they're a PTFE and a hose. And I have the hose and I have the other fittings basically here for them. These are a 45, but they're wrong ones. The reason I say I'm having a hell of a time, most of this stuff I'm getting from Summit. These here that I had originally ordered are a 45, but they're not made for a PTFE hose. They're just a regular AN fitting, so they don't have the small olive inside for the hose. And so I went and I figured, well, I'll just hang on to them, whatever. They actually did reimburse me for them, but I don't have to return them. But they're just a regular 45. Anyway, I ordered some other ones and ordered their Summit brand, which I usually get anyway, but ordered them, and they were back ordered a week or two. I'm like, fine, we'll get them in a couple weeks. We'll just wait a little bit longer. Well, now those got pushed back even further, and it's like a month out from now, and I really want to get this thing running. So just today I went and ordered two more from a different brand. So it's not the Summit brand, it's a Frigola brand. They're a little bit different looking, but they should work for a PTFE. So once those show up, hopefully in a couple days, I can get those lines made and get these things going. You know, I could make a little bypass that just bypasses from one fitting to the next. But in the case that I didn't get all the debris out of this engine, if I crank this up and let it run for a little bit, I want my filter to be able to catch all that stuff. So after all that went wrong with this thing, I want to make sure that on this initial startup that everything is being filtered, and then we can get going here. But otherwise this thing is just basically ready to crank over and test. I did get my thermostat in. I went with a little bit less, what do you want to say? I went from a 187 to a 180 temp thermostat on here, so we'll see how that works. But in the meantime, I had showed you that I had my coolant lines made. These are the painted ones. Well, being I had time to think about it and everything, I did some more research online, and I didn't like how this rippled. And you know, these are made out of copper. You can see all my scraps sitting right there. But this stuff bent and kinked so easily. So I mean, these they came out pretty good. Got them to where they're usable, and with the black paint you don't really use it, but I'm like, I just wanted to do a better job on those. I just wasn't 100% happy with them, even though these would work fine. I'll probably save these just for a backup if I have to. What I decided to do is I wanted to check and see if I can get aluminum ones or stainless steel ones. I believe there is stainless steel pipe you can get. It's a little more expensive, of course, but what I was looking for is 5/8. I don't want something real thick where I can't bend it real nice. But I was able to find this 5/8 pipe here. You can see I already got one made up, but I got this from Speedway Motors. This is 5/8 aluminum tubing, and I already have the one made, so I have my pattern. But this came out awesome. I am so happy I tried this aluminum stuff. I don't have any kinks in my corners. It was way nicer to work with. I mean, you can see how it stretches it a little bit when you bend it, where it'll get a little bit thinner in one area, but I mean, there are no kinks whatsoever. I'm almost tempted not to paint it because it looks so nice. I'm actually got to work on my second pipe here, but first one fits good. I got my bead rolled on there with my little special tool I showed you guys. And so far it's fitting. I got it nice and parallel with the fuel rail here. And it's nice and level with the fuel rail there. So I want to make sure the other one is the same. So these should turn out way better. I still plan on painting them black. Like I said, it kind of matches the fuel rail almost in color. You know, this is more stainless, but being aluminum, I'm like, I kind of want it to hide somewhat or be hidden. So I'll probably end up painting them black, but yeah, they turned out great. The other thing I'm going to do is, I had shown you my clamps. This was the old clamps here. They're kind of a You know, it's just, I had bought just individual clamps like this, but I bolted them together, and that's how I spaced them apart, just with a bolt like that. What I ended up finding was these other ones that are a little bit closer together. They're more simple than these. You know, here they've got 4 pieces where you're trying to bolt everything together and keep it together, and it's kind of a pain in the ass, but I liked them. It's just because originally when I got these, they have the mounting bolt right there, and I thought, well, just in case I use a bracket to come off of the fuel rail here or something and come up and mount it, I can bolt that all to that bracket and then bolt it through everything. Well, once you get both lines in here and clamped down, these things don't really move at all. So I ended up going and buying these. Like I said, they're more simple. You're not trying to hold 4 pieces together. You just put the bolt down the middle. And one thing it'll do too is, you can see here, if I line up one of the pipes, it moves the 2 pipes closer together. So they're not spaced out as far this way. They'll be a little bit tighter, which I like. So we're going to try those. I got more of them. They're a little bit cheaper than buying these tier 2. So we'll still probably end up putting 3 on here. Might add 4 total, 2 there and then 2 here, or I don't know, maybe I'll go 3 here, 2 there. We'll see how it comes out. But I'm going to I'll kind of show you how I'm making my second one. And it just works so much nicer. So definitely go, if you're going to do this, go aluminum. If you want to go stainless, I'm sure it might even work even nicer, but don't try the copper. This aluminum was way nicer. Can't remember what the price was on this. I think it was roughly the same price as what copper was. The copper might have been a little bit more expensive, but Speedway Motors, this was 5/8. Fuel rail is what this is for, or what they have it labeled for, but this will work great for coolant. And we'll get the second one run here and see how it turns out. All right, take a look at that. That turned out awesome. I'm liking the results of that way better. I do have to trim this hose right here down a little bit because of the way it's bent. The pipe will clear the fuel rail, but the hose is rubbing underneath just a little bit, so I got to trim that down just a hair. Maybe take 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch off of that hose, and then it'll clear. We'll be good there. I got to put my clamps on yet, but man, the contrast with the aluminum and the black clamps, I almost want to leave it that way. I did go and throw the ignition coil covers on here just to see what it looks like assembled, and it looks great, but I think I still want to paint them black. But everything lines up nice, and I'm happy with it. But I think if I paint them black, a lot of the attention will be taken away from the pipes and basically go towards the engine. I just kind of did this quick thing where I just laid these on here just to somewhat make them black, so it's somewhat hidden. So I think I want the attention to kind of the orange and the contrast with the black, not necessarily the heater hoses there or the heater pipes. I mean, I'll still have the fuel rails that are going to be that color, but I'm okay with that. I'm not going to take them off and paint them. So it's just mainly coolant lines I want to kind of hide a little bit. I know there's a lot of black in here to begin with, but I think that kind of makes a difference if I paint them versus all shiny like that. Not that that looks bad, but I am definitely happy with that. So we'll get this wrapped up. We'll get some paint on those. Get this all installed, our clamps. Once I get all that done, the coolant system is back together now that I got that thermostat in also. Those hoses are all tied up. So once we get to that point where it's all painted, all we're waiting for is those two fittings down here on the oil filter housing or the adapter. And once we get those lines made up, I can crank this thing up and get this thing fired. So hopefully in a couple days, we'll get those parts in and we'll get this thing cranked over. There we go. Lines are all painted and installed, and I think those things look awesome. They came out great, and I think that'll, I really like that improve, just to clean up where those hoses used to run, because they used to kind of run across here and just cluttered it up. Now, ultimately, when I eventually get around to it, I'm going to move this bundle of wires here. I'm going to move it back here and kind of follow back there. So all this would be cleaned up. Kind of all that would be cleaned up other than the master cylinder kind of in the way, and pretty much your attention draws right to the engine itself, so you don't see all this clutter in the way. So I wanted to tackle my transmission dipstick next. This is a B&M dipstick that's made for F-150, 10R80, 6R80, the Ford transmissions. So this is what it comes basically in the box. I like it because it's got a lock, you know, kind of locks firmly up here. I wouldn't say locked, but there's an O-ring so it gets tight. Nice looking little bracket here. Everything is well made, but it's just too long. This is about 40 inches long, and I only need about 2 feet basically. So that's what this other hose here is. And I had kind of asked them before I bought it if you can actually change this or shorten it at all, and they said no. But I wanted to see if I could actually shorten it, because there's AN fittings at the top that this hose will unscrew, and at the bottom. So there's this little fitting. So I figured I could shorten that hose and then somehow shorten the dipstick itself. I've already got kind of shortened up. It's just a cable. But what I did, so it's just kind of a loose, flimsy cable. But what I had done, I already kind of shortened it up a little bit here. But before I did that, when I had it in here, I just put a piece of tape down where it stuck out at the end. And so I put a piece of tape right flush with the end of the fitting here. So it should be pretty close to the way they had it adjusted from brand new here. So you know that your fluid level is in the correct place. So what I did, I'll show you this too. Up on this end, the cable had a little nipple that stuck out, maybe 3/8 of an inch, aluminum, and then it was crimped on here, so this cable was crimped on. And I tried to pull this out to see if I could just loosen that up a little bit, pull it out, and then cut it and make it shorter. But I ended up having to cut that nipple off where it was crushed or crimped together right there. And then, I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but I ended up putting a set screw in there. I drilled it and put a set screw. And so that'll be my way of shortening this up. So then what I'm going to end up having to do here is, like I said, this is the end that goes in the transmission. It's just got a nice little O-ring or washer, upper washer there. That'll screw into where the dipstick is. And this comes off. It's just a little bracket where the top would be. So I won't be using that. Maybe I'll use that for something else. I did have this 8N-8N AN hose. This is PTF hose. It wouldn't necessarily have to be the PTFE hose. But this actually came off of my remote oil filter for the engine. So it just kind of worked out that it was the right length. So it's about 2 feet long. And it'll screw right on there. So basically all I have to do is assemble it. Get my fitting on there, down by the transmission. And then I just have to measure from the bottom of this fitting to where my top of my tape is here. And that's how much I'm going to end up having to cut off and shorten it up. And then eventually that'll be just sticking out the bottom like it was when it was brand new, but everything was shortened. So So yeah, all I'm gonna have to do is on this end is just take that set screw out. There's the set screw. I just drilled and tapped that. I forget what size that is. I think that's an size number 8-32. But it's pretty easy to drill that. I just got to watch out for the threads so you don't screw up the threads here. But there's just enough room to put a smaller set screw in there. So I'll take that out, cut out as much of this cable off as I need, and then put it back in there, and it should be short enough to fit in the hose here. Leave that out for now. And what I plan on doing set the hose down there for a second. Somewhere over here is where I'm going to end up putting that thing. I was originally going to kind of put it back here on this part of the heater box. I don't want to get too far over to this side just because there's a lot of, it has to go straight down past a lot of wires. I don't want that rubbing. So the better spot would be over where this curve is, but because it's a flat bracket that came with it, I don't know exactly how I should mount it there. So I decided that I'm going to end up having to put it right here. Kind of show you, kind of stick it between the wires there. So it's going to be something similar to this. Let's see if I can get this basically mounted just like that. I've got to build a little bracket off the heater box that I'll be able to bolt that onto right there. But it was a little tricky because now I have my heater hoses, my pipes rearranged here, so they're going to be coming right about where I was going to originally put this anyway. So that kind of hides it there. You could come up higher or come up back here on the firewall more, but I didn't like that idea. So I'm going to have it kind of away from the heater hoses, which are running this way. Over here, it clears everything. Right now the hood hinge is kind of in the way, but once the hood is open, I should have plenty of room. Come down, unscrew that, pull it out, put any fluid in that I need to right there. So I just got to make a little bracket, mount it right there. I do have to watch out for my fan resistor right here. I did take that out to make sure there's nothing inside the box that I'm going to, maybe run a screw into or something like that. But it does just clear all that. With this mounted, I'll still be able to get that resistor out of there. So I think that's a good spot. And then down here, if you can kind of see, it's just going to run down. Should clear the exhaust plenty fine. And then right there is the, let's see if I can see that. Right there is where it's going to go into the transmission. There, I've got this all shortened up now. I ended up cutting about 10 inches off of everything. Total length from the tip of the dipstick to here must have been about 40 inches because right now it's about 30 total length. So, but yeah, you can see my mark. Came out right to the end where I had my tape on there. So now it's just a matter of making a bracket and getting that mounted in the truck. I already kind of had a little cardboard cutout here of my bracket. It's just going to be a simple L bracket, but basically it's going to be kind of at a slant right there. It's just going to be shoved in there. Get that to bend over, but something similar to that. It'll mount 2 holes here, and then I'll put probably 2 screws on the back side there. So just got to find some scrap metal, and then we should be able to get that mounted up there pretty quickly. All right, I got my little transmission dipstick wrapped up here. You can see I got it mounted. I got my little bracket made. I put a little black paint on it. That's nice and sturdy there. And down here, it just kind of wraps right down. Got clearance against the firewall and right into the transmission. It's a little on the shorter side when I cut it, but worked out off just fine. So, and all we have to do is just put the dipstick in, and we're good to go. Once we run it, we'll double check. the fluid level, because I had some come out there when I put the little adapter into the transmission, but turn that so the B&M is facing out. And we got plenty of room to clear the hoses and everything. That'll work perfect. So quick and easy little upgrade there, and glad I got it on there now. So I was able to find some really long lines that I had. I think these are old transmission cooler lines that I had from my old setup. I'm still waiting for my 45 fittings, my 45 degree fittings. You can see I got, maybe kind of see them in there. Right now there's 90s in there. I got them kind of in there to fit. I'm a little impatient, so I'm just making these lines fit. They're really freaking long, but I can replace them once those other fittings get here. They're already kind of pre-made or pre-made up, so I didn't have to do much. I just had to install this one fitting here on the end of the hose. But they're hooked up to the oil filter. Everything is hooked up here. So it'll work for now, it's just temporary. But yeah, let's give this thing a try here and see if we can't make a little oil pressure and just see what it sounds like to crank it over. All right, I decided that I would pull all the plugs out. You know, I already had the injectors disconnected. I pulled the plugs out so the engine would crank over easier. I spun it a bunch of times, made sure I had oil pressure. Got that now. So I installed everything else. I put all the plugs back in, hooked up my injectors, my spark plugs and all that stuff. Should have everything buttoned up here. I don't have coolant in it yet, just in case for some reason it's got to come back apart, but I want to try and start it up now, and hopefully I did everything right and she fires up. So we'll try it out here and see how she sounds. So. Hopefully make sure we don't have any leaks here. So far it's sounding pretty good. Got about 80 pounds oil pressure. Oof. She sounds good. It wasn't missing or anything, so I got the timing chains put in all right. You can see a lot of smoke coming off of it from the, I'm sure, oil on the headers and stuff, or dust or whatever. Been sitting a while, so just kind of looking it over here. Make sure we don't have any major oil leaks. Any fuel leaks? Everything seems to be good so far. We'll go through this with a fine-tooth comb and put some coolant in it and get those rings broke in. Make sure they're seated nice. But that's definitely makes me happy. A weight off my shoulders, man. Been waiting a while to get this thing back on the road. It's almost been, well, longer than probably 6 months since June. It's January right now, so, and yeah, it's happy to have that back running again. But what I did is I just kind of put in some cheaper oil, kind of flush the system out. So we'll let it run a little bit longer. Like I said, once I get some coolant in it, get the oil circulating and stuff, kind of wash out the engine and stuff. And we'll change that oil, dump that, change the filter. Probably do that a couple times just to make sure any material that's in there has been flushed out. And then we'll end up putting the good oil back in it. But so far, I'm happy with that, man. Right, guys, appears everything's working good on here now. I got it up and running. I got the coolant put back in it. I haven't gotten it up to temperature yet. I'm going to probably do that next here. And get the thing running, get the oil changed, do that a couple times just to make sure that any other debris that's in the crankcase or the engine is kind of flushed out. and it should be good to go. But so far so good. I think everything's good to go there. I'll probably get the hood put up back on it soon here, and then after that I can kind of get started on the fuel cell I want to build for this thing. So for now everything seems to be good, and we'll do some more kind of making sure there's no leaks or anything, get some more run time on it, and it should be good to go. But until next time, guys, stay tuned.